Central Alberta was a relatively uninhabited land when Ed Barnett, a former Northwest mounted policeman, settled in the Lacombe area back in 1883. As a tribute to his service in that unit of trailblazing peacemakers, Barnett was entitled to claim a section of land of his choice. Upon seeing the grassy valley of the parkland with its abundance of water, he knew that he had found the perfect place to homestead and start ranching. The process of building his ranch was slow. Barnett was all alone to build a shelter for himself and his horses while trying to tame the wild land he needed for his cattle. The Northwest Rebellion of 1885, which pitted the Métis and Native Americans against the white settlers, put Barnett at least temporarily at odds with the Cree and Blackfoot tribes in central Alberta. Most of the white settlers left central Alberta for safety at Fort Macleod south of Calgary. Barnett was left to defend his property alone against any possible attacks. His years as a Northwest mounted policeman, though, proved useful during the rebellion. Experience had sharpened his tracking, orienteering, language, and diplomatic skills. Knowledge of Cree and Blackfoot culture gained during his service with the Northwest Mounted Police ensured the survival of Barnett and his ranch in what were hazardous times.
One morning while sitting on my doorstep, I saw in the distance about 20 mounted braves from the Bobtails band, all decked out in their war paint. They were looking for trouble. I took my horses and put them in the cabin. It was likely those Indians would have taken them. This done, I slipped outside, unarmed, and met my visitors. They lined up in front of my cabin and put on quite a demonstration. Two of those braves approached me and demanded food. I handed them some tea and tobacco. After a brief powwow, I convinced them I had enough men inside to protect my position. The horses inside the cabin were making quite a noise moving around. It sounded like that cabin was full of people. The Indians turned to leave. I slipped inside the cabin and closed the door. A short distance out, one of those braves turned and fired a couple of shots right at the cabin. No damage was done, and there was no need to return any fire. A blizzard blew in that night and cooled the thoughts of any of those Indians who might want to come back for a fight.
Barnett, despite the danger of attack from Cree and Blackfoot, carried important messages as a dispatch rider between Calgary and Edmonton. When the rebellion was over, he was joined by his brother Jack, who, upon hearing of the prosperity Ed was beginning to enjoy, came from their hometown of Elmont, Ontario, to assist in making the dreams of ranching come true. In 1890, the Calgary and Edmonton Railroad was started. They decided to pass right by Ed Barnett's ranch. A flood of prospective homesteaders began to use the train to move to their land of choice. Many weary travelers found Barnett's ranch a hospitable place. Barnett always welcomed them into his home, acting as a stopping house along the Calgary and Edmonton Trail. In 1891, the Barnetts were joined by many of their Elmont friends. The town was beginning to take shape. The Barnetts had two separate lodgings. Ed continued to run the stopping house and ranch. Jack moved to the lake bearing his name a few miles northwest of his brother. Jack's wife Lucy was a former actress, and she became the unofficial welcoming committee to new families in the Lacombe area. The Canadian Pacific Railroad took notice of the number of people flocking to the central Alberta parklands and decided to give the area a siding. The CPR gave boxcars to blossoming communities as train stations and mail rooms. Originally siding number 12, the community's name was soon changed by the residents to Barnett Siding in honor of the Barnett families. The CPR decided to change the community's name to Lacombe. This was in homage to the missionary Father Lacombe, who brought peace to the Native Americans in the area. By 1896, the settlement had grown to the point that an application was given to the territorial government to make Lacombe officially a village. William Burris was elected the first overseer or mayor of Lacombe. He had been the town postmaster, and being an educated man, seemed the logical choice to undertake the care of the town.
William Burris was my husband's grandfather, and he came to Lacombe in about 1890, I think. before the railroad, the first time he came was, he, he came by horseback from Calgary to Lacombe, and he had a homestead east of Lacombe, east and a little bit north. I'm not sure where it's situated, but it's there. And he must have been very community-minded, because he was made overseer.
The town grew by leaps and bounds, and by 1900 it had a larger population than Red Deer. A population boom in Red Deer soon after the turn of the century made it the hub of activity in central Alberta, but for a while Lacombe was in competition for that distinction. People were eager to farm and live in the community, the location serving as a convenient stopping point between the larger cities of Edmonton and Calgary. Because of this, the town council made a request for the establishment of a port of entry in the town of Lacombe.
Lacombe serves a very large farming territory to which a port is becoming a necessity. At present, the goods of incoming settlers are subject to long delays at Calgary due to congestion at that point.
An immigration hall was established close to the railway where, for a very good price, people new to the area could stay until homesteading or housing could be arranged. One resident of the town, Jake Dolmage, acted as a self-appointed immigration officer. Upon a train's arrival, he would check out the would-be settlers to the area. Those he deemed as unsavory sorts were ushered by Jake to a nearby well. A sampling of Lacombe's alkali water with its unpalatable taste and texture was enough to convince these characters to keep moving on in search of greener pastures and clearer waters. People who appeared to be decent folk were given a tour of the area and welcomed without the introduction to the water. The town grew steadily, and by 1906 Lacombe was well on its way to being a commercial center and community hub. Many businesses saw Lacombe as a vital link to the growing farming community of central Alberta. The Merchants Bank was completed in 1904. Its prominent place on one of the best properties in town, as part of the Flatiron Block, proclaimed that Lacombe was no longer in danger of being abandoned. Brick construction and lofty design promoted a sense of security and trust for the townspeople and local farmers who were hesitant to entrust a bank with their hard-earned money. Cash in a coffee tin saving was still the preferred choice by many local residents. However, the Merchants Bank's beautiful and strong construction convinced many that the bank would be a safe place to put their savings. The Victoria Hotel also began extending its capacity to serve the public. As one of the first hotels in the area, it was always assured of business. Extensions and additions were constructed, and by 1901 the hotel was one of the largest buildings in Lacombe. The entrance to the hotel was such that a horse and its rider could gallop up the street and right into the main lobby and bar, hardly breaking stride. The rider could still be sitting on his horse when he ordered a beer, much to the astonishment of the bellhops and customers. The bar of the Victoria Hotel was a favorite spot for men to gather after a hard day's work. The disruptive and unruly crowd was often too much, and the sole constable, Roy Baines, often could not control them. On one occasion, the rowdies would not accept Constable Baines' request to leave the hotel. When he tried to assert his authority by showing his gun to the crowd, the mob threatened to hang him. He quickly made his escape before they could make good on their threat. Sometimes the arrested were too numerous for the poor constable to keep his eye on. In such a case, he would send a message to Edmonton for reinforcements. If the train was running the right way, officers would come and help disband the lawless mob, even taking some of the more riotous troublemakers to the jail in Edmonton. The Victoria Hotel definitely was the place to party in Lacombe. Fire was, rather unfortunately, the major factor in the town's building process. Fire seemed to have a love for Lacombe. In those formative years of growth in Lacombe, blazes managed to strike nearly every building in the downtown area. The low levels of readily available water, dry prairie grass growing in the streets and alleys, and the fragile wood construction of buildings made the town a prime candidate for fires. These factors also increased the likelihood of a fire spreading to surrounding buildings if proper fire suppression was not used in a timely or efficient manner. In 1906, just when the construction of the Merchants' Bank was completed, a fire swept through the Flatiron Block. The wooden structures of the block could not withstand the inferno, and many people lost their shops. The only building remaining in the site was the Merchants' Bank. Its craftsmanship and strong brick construction made it very resistant to flames. The fear that another fire could strike and destroy the rest of the downtown area was very real. After the Flatiron Block fire, the town council adopted a bylaw stating that all new buildings constructed in the downtown area would be built of brick, and that all older buildings were to be covered with a brick veneer. It was hoped that these measures would prevent the spread of any future fires. The shop owners in town, fearing that their businesses could be lost to an inferno, were happy to oblige. A volunteer fire brigade began practicing fire suppression techniques regularly and soon became one of the best brigades in the province, winning championships 4 times in the early 1900s. The firemen, led by blacksmith Fred Taylor, saw much action in the early days of Lacombe's history. They came from local farms and businesses to keep Lacombe a thriving community, but for all their hard work they could not keep all the fires at bay. In the early hours of January 3, 1911, the Victoria Hotel burned to the ground. The brick veneer could not contain the horrific blaze. Within mere hours, all that remained of the Victoria Hotel, one of the largest and best-known places in town, was a smoldering pile of debris. It was considered to be one of the most terrible disasters in Lacombe's history. The fire in the Victoria Hotel burned many businesses in the same block. Puffer's Meat Market was one of those businesses. The William Puffer family were cornerstone pioneers and were considered to be an important element in the growth of the town. Puffer's tolerance for all people and his willingness to help anyone in need assisted many newcomers to get settled. He hired people who would not have found work, often saving them from freezing and dying in the bitter cold of the Alberta winters. When the Victoria Hotel fire claimed his business, Puffer struck a deal with his good friend Hop Chung to construct a new building to house both of their businesses. Hop Chung, a Chinese immigrant, had run a rather successful laundry and restaurant near the Victoria Hotel. His business had suffered the same fate as Puffer's business. The new Puffer-Chung building was completed the following year, and the two men enjoyed much success in their business ventures. The building's second story was used as a meeting hall by the various clubs in town for many years, while the first floor was split in two to hold both businesses.
Old Bill Puffer was a livestock dealer here right after the folks came to the country. In fact, when the folks came to the country in 1905, he was a great friend of old Hop Chung. And Hop Chung was in the country when my dad and grandpa came. A little story that my dad had never seen a Chinese person. And when they came in early in March the 5th, 1905 to the Northwest Territories, which Lacombe was in, they went there for breakfast. Dad had never seen a Chinese person, and they were dressed in the old Chinese custom, the kimono and the pigtails. Dad couldn't figure that out. He was 15 years old, and what kind of people are these, you know? He just couldn't figure them out, and later became very, very close friends. Also, it was awfully hard for Chinese women to get to this country. You had to buy them, buy the way out. And old Hop Chung was thought enough of that the women, not the women, the men, businessmen of this town, raised the money for Mrs. Chung to come to Canada. And they lived, they're both buried here up at the cemetery in Lacombe. Nobody ever went there that didn't, if they needed a grub stake, they got the grub stake. Most of them were paid for, but many of them, you know, they get the grub stake and
just forgotten.
Just forget, yeah. Yeah, he was a very, very well thought of man, and in the business world of Lacombe, he's one of.
Certainly, his name appears many times in old historical.
Oh yeah, he. They tell me it's one of the largest funeral processions was ever in Lacombe.
With the burning of the Victoria Hotel, that piece of real estate in town was available for redevelopment. The corner lot at the intersection of Barnett Avenue and Nanton Street was considered the best location in town to run a business. The Royal Bank, eager to become involved in the growing community, purchased the lot in 1913 and built a sturdy and attractive building with an enormous safe in which the people of the town would feel comfortable placing their valuables. Although the danger of fire spreading through town was of concern to the residents, the townspeople found time to engage in recreational activities and have fun. The popular spot to picnic, swim, and socialize was Gull Lake. When the Howell family, who ran a drugstore, took off during the summer months to live alongside the lake, the people in town thought they were strange. But by 1908, the waters of Gull Lake began to recede, revealing beautiful expanses of sandy beaches. The people began to take notice of the area and its potential as a great spot to take a vacation. Two summer hotels, the Thistle Inn and the Lakeside Hotel, were established, boasting rooftop dancing and great lodgings. The Cummings family, founders of the first covered rink in central Alberta, located in Lacombe, also owned a sawmill on Gull Lake. They converted one of their tugs, built to haul logs to the mill, into a party boat which could carry 40 passengers on a midnight cruise around the lake. One of Canada's pioneering aviators, Colin Caldwell, had been a long-time resident of Lacombe before heading to the gold fields of eastern Canada as a pilot. Occasionally, Colin would fly his amphibious plane to Gull Lake for a visit. His visits were always attended by locals interested in finding out his latest exploits in the untamed parts of Canada. Residents of Lacombe could always expect a fascinating tale of adventure when Colin arrived. By 1914, Gull Lake had become very popular, with over 200 boats docked along the shoreline. A yacht race was run with more than 2,000 people coming to witness the festivities. The mile-long Wrigley swim meet was also held when a pier was added. Picnicking was a favorite pastime for everyone, and sometimes church-sponsored outings took place, featuring potluck lunches and sandcastle building contests.
One of my early recollections of my parents and another couple from Spring Valley decided to go out to Gull Lake for a week or two holiday in the summertime. And I don't know what happened, but the horses got away and came home. And my dad walked from Gull Lake to 10 miles southeast of Lacombe to bring the horses back so that we could get back from Gull Lake.
The need for electrical power was essential in those early days, but there were no companies that put consistent running power into every home in the province. Towns usually had to invent a way to generate electricity or go without. In 1904, the town of Lacombe resolved to build a hydroelectric dam in order to supply electricity. 8 miles from Lacombe, where the Blind Man and Red Deer Rivers meet, the power plant was started. In true pioneer fashion, the Blind Man River Electric Power Company built a dam out of poplar trees to divert the water of the Blind Man River to a power plant. To avoid excess leaking, clay was packed into the felled logs. A pipe carried water to a turbine that was located in a trench. The turbine turned from the force of the water, thus supplying power. A transmission line was run from that site into the town. In 1906, Lacombe got its first electricity. By October of that year, the town was receiving electricity for homes and was wired for street lighting. With the onset of winter, the engineers realized they had made a major oversight. The Blind Man River soon froze over, restricting the flow of water to the turbine. Power was erratic and often non-existent. The plant was basically shut down until April of 1907. With the spring thaw came more problems. The dam was leaking too much. The clay that was packed into the poplar logs could not hold the water very well. A good steady supply of water could not be maintained to turn the turbine. The transmission poles that ran from the plant to Lacombe also became a problem. They ran through swampy areas, and it was difficult trying to keep the poles standing upright. The inconsistency of power frustrated the town council, who soon undertook measures to find alternative sources of electricity. A steam engine run by Danner's Peacemaker flour mill in town was used as an auxiliary plant if problems were encountered. The steam engine began to be used much more than the hydroelectric plant after problems with the dam started adding up. The Poplar Dam often lost logs due to heavy spring runoff. A constant maintenance schedule was employed and cement footings were installed in order to keep the dam stable. The town had had enough and bought the Blind Man River Electric Power Company in 1909. A steam plant and turbines were installed in town to run the electricity when the hydroelectric plant was not functioning. With the more consistent power coming from the steam plant, more homes in town asked to get wired for electricity. By 1910, the dam was deemed too expensive to maintain. It would actually cost the town more money to repair the dam than to run it, and the steam plant became the primary source of power. Any hope of using the dam to give Lacombe power was ended when the dam was destroyed in heavy spring floods of 1915. The machinery and land of the hydroelectric plant was sold and forgotten. The idea that hydroelectricity is a viable source of power in Alberta would be realized much later with the Dixon Dam. Electricity was not only a luxury for the townspeople. For many establishments, electricity was a necessity. The use of electricity helped to change many institutions and made life for everyone definitely better. One of the biggest beneficiaries to the new supply of electricity was the medical service. With electric light, doctors were given a new instrument to combat illness. Country doctors could now safely practice in emergency situations with the aid of Thomas Edison's invention. Without the use of electric light, many of the doctors would have to delay a necessary operation until the light of day or risk the procedure without the adequate lighting. The use of electric light made caring for the sick easier on the doctors. But many people still had to wait several days for care from a doctor. If a person in need of medical attention lived outside of town, the doctors often found it difficult to reach the patient before it was too late to help. Transportation on the prairies was limited to horses, so a message that someone needed medical attention could often take more than a day to reach the physician. With only a few doctors in the untamed prairie, the job of physician was a challenging position to assume. Despite the difficulties facing these doctors on the prairie, Lacombe is said to have had one of the best assemblages of practicing medical personnel in Alberta, even when compared to the larger towns of the province.
In those days, doctors were expected to do, a country doctor was expected to do everything that needed to be done. And here in Lacombe, we were pretty well as well off as the larger centers, such as Red Deer were. Red Deer was of very little help to us in those days. They did not have a blood bank. They had only a couple of specialists, and their hospital, although better than ours, did not give us the backup that we now get from Red Deer. So anything that we couldn't handle went to Edmonton, and I must add that it wasn't too often that we had to send folk. Looking back, I'm amazed at what we did and how well it went.
H.J. Richardson became one of the first doctors of Lacombe, but in 1896, after only 2 years in town, he sold his practice to Dr. E.M. Sharp. Dr. Sharp became a longtime resident and doctor in Lacombe. By 1906, with the arrival of the dentists A.E. Unger and J.S. Shute, Lacombe had a fine medical corps which included Drs. Simpson, Hines, and Burris. The working conditions for these doctors were rather primitive. Often the operations had to be performed on kitchen tables or on the ground and in an unsanitary environment. This was especially true in the lumber camps and railroad construction camps where chances of accidents were high. Because of their dedication and education, doctors were highly respected members of the community. Their advice and counsel were sought for many positions outside of medicine, such as the school board and town council. Drs. Simpson, Sharp, and Hines served as mayors of Lacombe as well.
I remember Dr. Henry was at Bentley at that time, and the ruling was, I suppose it still is, any surgery that was done, there always had to be 2 doctors in the operating room. So each time Dr. Henry had any surgery, he used to call Dr. Locke to go out and be there with him. This Sunday evening, he called up and said he had an emergency operation. Would the doctor go out? And Jane said, well, it has snowed and it has blown all day. He said, I don't know whether I will ever get there or not, but he said, I will try and I will start out. And Gwen Halpin was nursing in the hospital at Bentley at that time, and she came and called over Dr. Henry's shoulder and said to my husband, don't try to come alone. She said, the roads are impossible. Call the house. The Halpins were living next door to us with their 9 children. She said, call the house and get one of the boys to come with you. So Jane called the house and they said, oh, sure. So when our car came up, Jane always kept his car downtown in the garage. Out came the Halpins. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. And they got in the car. Jane said, actually, they literally carried his car out to Bentley. He said they'd only go a few feet. They were in another snowdrift and stuck. He said, out all these boys would get, one after the other. They just pick the car up and push it through that snowdrift. Away they went for another few yards. They were stuck again. Out they all got again. I can always remember the following morning when they got back, Jane calling out to, they lived right next door to us at that time, called out, thank you so much for their help. And they replied, think nothing of it. Call us anytime.
Through the dedication of local farmers and politicians, the Dominion Experimental Station was begun. The area residents were very aware of the excellent soil surrounding Lacombe and pushed for the establishment of a research station in which new farming techniques could be tested. With the formation of the experimental station, the town was put on the map as one of the premier testing grounds of the nation.
The beginning of the station was in 1906, actually, when the land was first looked at by people who were interested in convincing the federal government to put a research station here. This would have been the 7th research station in Canada at that time. And all the others had been established at the same time when the farms was originally placed in legislation, when the Farm Act was passed. But the first man to work here actually was Gladstone Hutton, and he was the person who was hired or commissioned by the federal government to look at the site, to make decisions, to buy horses that would farm it, to get some land prepared in the fall of 1906 so that it would be all set to go. And he did all of those things, and then came the problem, selling the idea to the federal government. And it was the Lacombe Board of Trade, of which Hutton was a member, that hit upon the idea of buying the land, because the government said they would not buy land. Even though this was the cheapest land in the whole area, in all of Alberta actually, they wouldn't buy it. And the reason they wouldn't buy it was because they had already been offered a gift of free land down at Lethbridge to establish an experimental farm there. What they didn't recognize or didn't pay any attention to was the fact that that free land was actually a return of 1 million acres that had been granted the person who was going to now give it to the government. Free land for developing a railway down in southern Alberta. So there was a lot of hassle about that. And finally, the Board of Trade group, decided to buy the land and offer it to the government for a meager sum. I think the total of $5,000 for the total farm land that had been homesteaded by Hiram and Mary Flewelling. And eventually, actually in early 1907, the federal government agreed, although the actual bill of sale wasn't consummated until 1910. In the meantime, Bill Puffer, who was one of the members of that Board of Trade, had managed to convince the province of Alberta that this was indeed the place for an experimental farm, and they developed it here. And Hutton was the first of the directors, and by 1910 he had established a provincial reputation for the character of the research that was being done, the quality of the livestock that he had, and all of the other things that subsequently made the reputation for Lacombe.
One of the first buildings constructed at the experimental station was the superintendent's house. The house was as advanced as the rest of the station, featuring a furnace and electricity long before most people in the area could obtain such luxuries. But the most advanced feature of the superintendent's house was the plumbing and running water in the house, ingeniously powered by a windmill behind the house. The incredible sum of $5,195 was used to construct the dwelling.
Hutton was a man of extraordinary vision. He saw what this could be, and he was the man who took it there in the first place. He was director of the station for 12 years, and in that period of time he developed it into a foremost livestock and plant and horticulture station that was renowned throughout the province. But among his big achievements was the initiation of the first agricultural extension tours in the province. The first one was held here in 1909, and it attracted 700 people, which is a tremendous crowd for that period of time, considering they all had to come by train from various parts of the province. And he continued this right up to the end when he left the station to become the director of the colonization branch for the CPR. And in the course of his work with livestock, he was a renowned judge, and in the course of that work he interested the entire community here in the livestock business. And one of the results of that really was this Central Alberta Agricultural Society. And here we have the sales pavilion, which was actually built in 1935. But it was a make-work project by the federal government during the Depression years. But it became the Lacombe Experimental Farm became the custodian of it, and we operated it for many, many years. This is where the great horse sales were held, which are one of the historical features of Lacombe. It was here that the bull sales still continue.
Do you remember the horse sales you used to have here?
Oh, yes. We used to use the skating rink to keep them in before the sales, and then bring them up to the pavilion here at the experimental farm and sell them. And they didn't have enough room for them, all the horses they used to bring in here. And I don't know how many they'd have at one time. Do you, George?
Well, that one year they had over 1,000 head of horses here.
Is that right?
Yeah.
This agricultural station at Lacombe was a very famous research place. They had raised and developed a lot of different products, agricultural products, for which Lacombe is quite famous. A lot of their grasses and crops and things like that were developed in their agricultural park, and there's no doubt about it, one of the big features of agricultural development is the production of the Lacombe hog, which was became world famous as one of the breeds of pigs.
By 1908, the experimental station looked after 180 varieties of cereals and vegetables, using them in tests on growth rates and techniques to increase the rate of maturity. They also established a horticulture study program with the addition of 35 types of annual flowers. The station initiated educational tours on site and by traveling throughout the district by train to show farmers the latest techniques in farming. The open house attendance records reflect the success of the experimental station, with around 1,200 people coming during the summer months to view the farm. By the time of Hutton's departure in 1919, the station put Lacombe area in the front of the field for quality and excellence in farming. The town of Lacombe seemed to be well on its way to becoming one of the most dynamic and up-to-date cities in Alberta. Plans were afoot by the Canadian Northern Railway to bring an important railroad spur from the coal mines of Nordegg to Lacombe. The Canadian Northern bought more land around Lacombe than anywhere else in Alberta in the hopes of turning the area into the distribution center for its entire coal supply. 1,000 jobs were to be made from this venture, and the town was very excited at the prospect of becoming so important so soon. But the Canadian Pacific, already the stalwart in the area, could not allow the tracks of another company to cross its right-of-way, and the idea was scrapped. While the Canadian Pacific's refusal to allow competitors to cross their property was a setback, another serious problem arose which killed the future plans for growth. The First World War had a direct impact on the lives of everyone in the Lacombe district. A loved one was lost in nearly every household, and many say that the best of an entire generation was wiped out by the war. 76 men from Lacombe died in those French and Belgian battlefields. But with the end of the war came more problems. Many of the soldiers returning in 1918 could not cope with life after the war. The soldiers struggled to return to normal life, and hardships had to be endured by the entire community. The returning soldiers also brought with them the deadly influenza virus. The home front now appeared like a war zone as well, as people struggled to defeat the flu, which took even more lives. The war and sickness was a temporary setback to the community, and while the townspeople would miss the dear departed very much, they knew that Lacombe was founded through perseverance and hard work. Despite adversity and setbacks common to Ed Barnett and the early pioneers who settled the area, the town of Lacombe continued to prosper and grow. The first paved road in Western Canada was built through town on the Calgary and Edmonton Trail, and people once again felt that they could accomplish anything they wanted. By 1920, the town was looking on the upside of rebuilding and becoming a beautiful community.
Right. Still water in that.
I've only been back here for 10 minutes, and look at how dirty my hands are.
Yes, by golly, if
Just
that
like
had
old times. Yeah, actually, the whole north wall was devoted to horseshoeing down. Yeah.
Did they used to have pulleys to, like I could sort of remember pulleys to pull up the horse's
Oh,
feet
like a
and one
sling,
kicks
yeah.
to
We'd have to
No,
be the bad ones.
no, my dad had a sling at Eckville. It was outdoors, where you could lift the horse right off the ground,
Well, I just
and
remember
tie
my
all
dad
4
shoeing
feet.
a horse, and the horse had its leg out
Oh,
like that, and
yeah.
they couldn't move.
I've never seen, I don't think old John ever had a sling, did he? And he
No, I don't
was
think
in
so,
there.
Tom. No.
But God, old John, he was only a little much smaller man, and he could pick up the darndest bigger horses. He had a way with them, he's an old Scotsman. He'd talk, God, a
Well, the blacksmiths usually got the ones that nobody else wanted to put shoes
Well,
on.
yes, that's what my father used to say.
He
If,
always done my pony.
if a man's got a quiet horse, he shoes it himself. If he's got a bronc, he brings it into town.
Yeah.
Saturday night was the only night of the week that had a movie when I was really small. And we didn't go often, but I can remember going when maybe Charlie Chaplin or Ben Turpin or one of those. It was silent, of course, and black and white, and they walked with very jerky movements. But what I remember more than the story of the show, Mrs. Woody used to play the piano. Because there was no sound with the picture, she would play the piano, and she would play softly when it was love scene maybe, and then it play louder and louder as the movie got more exciting. And
Saturday night, when I was really little, was the night that the stores were open and everybody went to town and did their grocery shopping. And one thing I remember was that people would go to the movies, and I don't know what time they would get out, 9:30 maybe, or towards 10 o'clock, and then they would go shopping for their groceries. And the store clerks were there till midnight.
But it was the one night of the week when the stores were open.
Yes.
Everything closed at 6 o'clock, always.
And Wednesday afternoon was
And
closed.
Wednesday afternoon, and Sundays for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The box socials kind of determined who was going to marry who, didn't they? You know,
That was the thought behind a lot of them, I'll tell you.
when you see some guy bidding $5 for a pie in those days, you knew that there was more to it than just the pie.
But there they surely eliminated us young fellas that only had 50 cents in our pocket, didn't it?
Yeah.
No competition. The Lions Club became quite active in war activities, fundraising. The baseball tournament was something that made Lacombe kind of famous because we were involved with hockey players from all through the United States. Particularly, we were fortunate in the early years because there were a lot of Negro teams that were unable to play in the major leagues because they were black, and consequently they had baseball teams that we encouraged to come to Lacombe to play, and they were probably the best baseball players on the North American continent. Were coming at our original baseball tournament because they weren't onto the big leagues yet. That tournament succeeded for quite a number of years. I think too, ball teams going from school to school did something for us, for the fact that we played not to win, but to enjoy playing with somebody else's ball team.
Oh, but the win had some satisfaction to it too.
Oh yes, but not the amount of money that we talk about today in sports.
No.
We didn't have it. So I think maybe that you would never have dared to slug somebody with a hockey stick in that year. You'd have been finished playing.
Oh yeah.
That would have been all too. I think that we organized more of our own sports and that sort of thing too.
Yeah.
Today, it seems to me the young people are expected to take part in hockey and whatever in the schools, and yet they don't have an opportunity to do the organizing themselves to any extent.
Yeah.
I think that's regrettable because we had to more or less create our own entertainment. Yeah. Were you able to have a skating rink at your school? You know?
Oh, if we made it, yeah. But you didn't have hockey sticks. You went and got a crooked willow and and a tin can, and you played what they called shinny. And most of us have got a few of the scars on our shins yet from missing the can and hitting you on the shins, or the can hitting your shins and doing a little damage.
Yes, there wasn't anything then either. I can remember I was probably 12 before I ever had a pair of tube skates.
Yeah, oh yeah.
A little pair of bob skates once that I inherited from somebody else, but I was so proud of those tube skates. I all of a sudden felt like a king with those.
I can remember the salt bag was harder. Salt came in cotton bags too, but heavier. And the print was harder to get out. And I can remember they were playing baseball. Those days there wasn't slacks. And I won't mention any names, but she was quite a hefty girl. So my brother was catching and she was up to bat. And of course her dress kind of blew up, and on the back of her thigh was 50 pounds. And my brother and I looked at each other. We couldn't help but we had to laugh because we just knew that thigh was 50 pounds.
The place where we're taking this picture from is my grandfather's place, and this foundation here is a barn that they had built, and actually it never really got finished. And my great-grandfather, George Brown, came from the States to Alberta in 1894 and was on their way to Clover Bar and got stopped in Lacombe overnight and ran across some people. They said, well, there's some pretty good places north of Lacombe, and that's so we checked them out, and we decided to stay there, and we celebrated our 100th birthday party here 6 years ago. And my daughter actually lives on the original homestead.
Mr. Goshlick was a remarkable musician, and he gathered up the community, young people, young men, and some of them didn't know a note, and he trained them.
He taught all instruments, violin, piano, and all band instruments. He had a good band going by the year 1905. I don't know how many band boys, but he had a good band by 1905, an orchestra, and 2 homesteads.
Well, there were birds nesting in our trees, and we were so ignorant we didn't know what they were, but they were nesting in different things around there. So Charlie decided he'd build some birdhouses for them. They were tree swallows. So he put out birdhouses along the fence, and the first year he came in one afternoon and he said, you know, there's a pair of bluebirds out there. So of course I had to go and see them. The next year there were 3 pair. The year after that there were 7 pair, and they just kept increasing from then on.
I tell you, there were some things quite primitive in a way. We had a heater, a wooden stove heater, at the back of the room, the one-room school. And on a very cold day, the children had to move their desks all around the heater because it wasn't very warm in there.
Did you have to make the fire in the morning too? Or?
I did at first, and then one of my students took it over. Yes, it meant going down there about 7:30 in the morning, and I had half a mile to walk. I remember one day, I think I had put too much fuel in the heater, and it was really roaring, and I got a little concerned about the fire. And foolishly, I got a basin of water, opened the heater up, threw in this pan of water on those hot coals, and I picked myself up about 5 feet back from the heater. And I was covered with gray ashes, but no harm done. But I'll never forget that.
At that time, the town office building was an old reconverted store that was owned by Jenkins Groceteria at one time, and it was located in the same site the present police and fire hall buildings are. And it faced north onto 50th Avenue, with the town office facing the 50th Avenue, and the police department had the back portion of the one and only main floor. There was a small welfare office in the basement of that same building, which was operated not too frequently, but
down in the flat here in 48, the spring of 48, it all flooded. Do you remember that, Cork?
Oh yes, yes, very much.
That's when Popo hooked all the cars together and pulled them through. He bought his first big wrecker. $5 a pull.
Yeah.
And he had about 5 strung out behind on chains, and the water would run right through your car, right in one door and out the other.
Yes, they had a lot of snow that previous winter, and guess what? It all melted and wound up over across the highway, Highway 12, east of Lacombe.
Another thing, when I grew up, I remembered opposite our place was what we call prairies. It was just bush and grass. Now it's all fields, you know, but the natives from Hobbema used to come down and tether their horses and put up their teepees. They'd have a big war dance or powwow, and I always remember watching. And then they'd come over and borrow some sugar sometimes or something if they were short. I kind of enjoyed watching them. That was something I remember too.
My dad was a blacksmith, and he went overseas. I think he went overseas in about 1941 when I was quite young, and he came back in 1945, and he was wounded overseas. He lost his left arm over in Germany, and after that we came back, and he got a sort of a pension, an army pension, and he ran the rink in Lacombe here for quite a number of years, the skating rink. I remember the celebration at the end of the last war, and everybody was running up and down the streets and yelling the war is over, and everybody was cheering and kissing, and and it was a great time in a great part of our history at that time, and we knew that pretty soon our fathers would be coming home.
And it was a good life. Things have greatly changed. I have seen tremendous changes in my lifetime. My grandfather told me that he thought he had seen the most changes that the world had ever seen, because he remembered when they didn't have matches. He could remember being sent to the neighbors to get coals out of the fireplace, taking an iron kettle and bring it home. Of course, they had a flint and steel that they could start a fire with, but this was quicker. And he saw the first reaper, and he saw the first train, and in that area of Ontario where he lived. And he saw the first threshing machine. They used straw carriers. They didn't have a blower on the separator. And he lived to see airplanes and cars and trucks and telephone and even the radio. We didn't have TV. Well, he died in 1924. But he had seen a tremendous change, and I believe I have too.